A recent study claimed that teetotalers called in sick more often than social drinkers. Now, is that surprising? I suspect that for a lot of people it is. I do think, though, that people sometimes don't call in sick when they should, and other people call in sick way too easily. Not forgetting that employers, of course, have a role to play as well in sick leave. Joining me to discuss all of this is Peter Cosgrove, future of work expert. Peter, are there different groups of people that view sick days differently, sort of culturally, within certain jobs? I mean, if you look at there are industries that we know. I mean, a lot of the trains and the public transport people, the employers would say that their absenteeism runs at a very high rate. Whereas I know when I was working as a doctor, our absenteeism was almost nil. Almost nobody was sick.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are still some companies that give you a certain amount of sick days, which is incredible. And I've heard people said, I haven't used up all my sick days. And that sort of thing is just crazy in this day and age. Whereas the flip side is, as you said, Ciara, if you're someone who's self-employed or who works for yourself, every day you're off sick, you're losing money. So the reality is, the first thing is there's a financial thing. And the second thing really is, most people who enjoy their job and are engaged in their work and like work are less likely to be sick, because actually you want to come in, and also you might feel a little bit guilty about leaving your employees in the lurch when you're not there. So I think there's a massive difference when people actually like what they do.
So certain industries where maybe there's low job satisfaction, they would have high rates of sick leave, and those where people are engaged, you know, animated, enthusiastic about their jobs, low rates. Is that kind of in a nutshell?
And I hate to say there is a bit of a stereotype to come with the more unionised, the more rigid these things are, and the more people feel there's a right to take certain days off sick. And, well, Johnny's been off sick for 3 days, so I should take a sick day here. And actually that just doesn't happen in companies. I suppose I would like to say more kind of either tech-savvy companies or companies where people are kind of working from wherever they want. And the reality is these days people can work from anywhere. So if people are able to work flexibly, you know, a lot of people would say, yeah, I might be a little bit sick, so I won't come into the office, but I'm still working, and I'm still able to do a lot. A lot can be done from your bed with a laptop these days, or even a smartphone. Yeah,
half of my job involves sitting in my bed very often on a laptop, because that's just part of what I do. The drinking thing is quite interesting, though. I was wondering, is it some reflection of there are lots of studies that say that moderate drinking, or people who are moderate drinkers, are healthier than obviously heavy drinkers who are not healthy at all, but interestingly enough, healthier than non-drinkers. So I thought maybe it's a reflection of that. But then could it also be a reflection of kind of guilt, that if you've been out for a few pints, you're in no way going to take the next day off because you don't want to be kind of accused of being a slacker in some way. Whereas, you know, if you hadn't been drinking at all and felt a bit under the weather, you might be more likely to take the day off because you didn't have the kind of didn't want to be caught for something kind of mentality.
Yeah, no, I think first it's a study more for France, and I think France and Ireland, the drinking culture is probably a little bit different. I think they're quite used to just having the one glass. I'm not sure our view of having one is very good. But the thing I think it doesn't bring into account is, even if you only have one or two drinks, that gives you a hugely worse night's sleep. And actually one of the biggest problems we have in the workplace now is people are coming in tired. When people are tired, they're generally grumpy. They generally aren't very as productive. They're not in as good form. So actually, we all know that when you have that night with no drink whatsoever and you feel good, and maybe you've had a walk in the evening, you get a fantastic night's sleep, you're ready for the next day. So I'm not sure as much about it. It was also self-reported, and I think when people self-report around alcohol, I think a lot of things come into play there.
A lot of things are about aspirational, the person I'd like to be rather than the person I am. But I'm interested in that thing you mentioned at the beginning. You were talking about people where there is like 20 sick days per year as part of your job, and I have also heard people say, I haven't taken all my sick days, as if they are a form of leave, which of course they are. But they're not supposed to be a take them all sort of thing. They're there to support you should you need them, but they're not there as a kind of an obligation to actually be off for. What's that about?
Well, firstly, you should be allowed to be sick. And I think one of the problems is in some companies, this is an employer's issue where they don't trust their employees. And when someone calls in sick, they're so worried about it because they immediately think the employer's thinking they're just taking the piss. They're just on the DOS. Right. So the first thing is, if someone's sick, they should be allowed to be sick. The last thing you need is a properly sick person coming in and infecting the rest of the office. And as you said, you can still do the odd bit from home. But the flip side, as an employee point of view, you got to have a bit of respect. If you're going to be sick, make sure you put in the 2 phone calls that could be the potential fires that have to be put out if you didn't put them in. Just let your colleagues know. Be respectful about it, because your colleagues are going to have to pick up the slack when you're not there.
And give as much notice and stuff. Like supposing you were vomiting the night before, text the night before so that people know they might have to get some cover for you. Or
and you also have to realise, if you're doing it regularly on a Monday or a Friday, people will be more sceptical. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That doesn't mean you start on Thursday and do a double, as I know someone used to do. So and
is that a thing? Do we see sick leave peak on Fridays and Mondays?
Yeah, it does.
It
does.
All right,
and
okay.
I think, that's just not to do with drink as well. If you look at people who've got kind of mental health issues, generally Monday is the worst day.
Yeah.
So I think from that point of view, Monday is a very tough day. And for anyone, I think employers have a huge issue with this. When we talk about an engaged employee, if somebody is dreading that Sunday night going into work, they don't sleep well, they're anxious. And I've had jobs, we've all had jobs at one time when you're going, oh my God, I cannot bear going into work. You should want to go into work the next day. Not skipping and jumping, but should at least think that you would like to go into work in the morning. And that's going to make it less likely that you'll be off sick.
Jim has texted in and he has said an average of 1 in 10 sick every day in the HSE, including nurses. Not good enough, wouldn't be tolerated in the private sector. He's not wrong. I mentioned public transport, but the health service also has absenteeism of about 10%. That's all paid. That's hugely expensive. Not only did the person who's off sick get paid, but then the agency person is brought in to kind of cover the thing. That's at elevated cost as well. Can anything be done to address that? I mean, you can't always make a job so wonderfully lovable that people are going to skip in to do it. Some jobs, some days are just hard work.
It's interesting to say that, Ciara, because a lot of this does come down to the fact that people are either feeling probably overworked, underappreciated, and therefore they almost feel it is their right that they need the odd almost mental health day to take off. And there's lots of studies out there that people are, I think it was in Denmark, they made nurses go from a 10-hour day to a 7-hour day or a 6-hour day, and productivity went up. They got as much work done because actually they felt they were being treated nicer and better, and sick leave went way down. So actually some of this, people will immediately blame the nurse or the doctor or whoever's taking the sick day, but actually it's the system. If people are taking that amount of sick leave, there's an overall problem with how people feel they're being treated, the trust they've got in the job they're doing, and that has to be looked at firstly.
Is there though? I mean, you have to ask the question, is there partly that? Yes, and I worked in health. It is grim and it is tough and it is relentless and you do burn out and all that. So I accept that. It's a tough gig.
Yeah.
But there will always be people who take the piss as well. And is it a combination, do you think, of those factors that feed into the 10% absenteeism?
Yeah, well, look, the problem is when there are people like that, the only challenge you have is you need to weed them out. There's no two ways about it. And this is a challenge. And that is a challenge. So if you have people who feel they can't be let go, and they don't have to perform more than adequately, in the private sector that won't happen, because they will be able to go, I'm sorry, you've had a couple of performance management reviews, you're not working out, we're going to let you go. If you're not able to do that to somebody, you are in a really bad situation because they have all the power. And as you said, while most people wouldn't exercise that, as you said, there will be people who go, well, I can just be sick, nobody's going to do anything about it.
You are listening to Ciara here, Newstalk 53106. Talking about sick leave there, just specifically in the public sector, because it's a little bit different, as we pointed out, as Peter pointed out, in the private sector. 53106, do you think people do take the piss, or do you think it is the grind of the kind of jobs people are asked to do? We'd love to know what you think. Someone has texted in and says, when I started work in a trade 20 years ago, my foreman said, never take off a Monday or a Friday because people will think you were on the tear. But if you do take off a Monday, make sure you take the Tuesday too, because it looks better.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, I had a friend who not only took the Thursday and Friday, he used to take the Wednesday, Thursday and Friday, because he said at that stage no one would believe I was taking the piss. And then he said the worst thing about it was the amount of sympathy he got on the Monday. But this guy was a well-known sick taker.
So flagrant piss taking.
No, there's people who are very good at this. And
very lastly, what did you think about the new stuff coming in about parental leave, that it's going to be extended from 3 months unpaid to 6 months unpaid? Will that be very hard for the SME, or is that a great boon for parents?
I think it's both. I would just love that we focus more on getting men to take more time off. What I think will happen is the biggest challenge with leave is not the policy, it's how employers react to you taking this time off and saying it's going to affect your career, or we don't want you to take it, or you can take it but it won't be looked on very well. So we need men to be taking this, especially on the first child. If you get the man and the woman to take some of the leave, maybe they'll both at the early stages work out what parenting is all about, and then maybe things will be a bit more equal as we go along.
And in fairness to men, they don't look after their health properly or their mental health properly, so maybe taking a little bit time out for them,
and they'll
of
only
all
do
people,
this
is a good
if
thing.
other people are doing it, because if no one else is doing it, they'll feel they can't do it. So you have to make this something where everybody feels they can do this.
Okay. 53106 as well, here on Newstalk. If you are a man, would you take parental leave? Would you take extended parental leave? We would love to know. Should you take it, particularly for your own sake and your own health and all that kind of stuff? Thank you very much for that, indeed, for talking to us. That is Peter Cosgrove there, Future of Work expert.